What's up everybody? Are you just starting out in video editing, or you're wanting to get into it, or you're into it and you want to learn a little bit more, or maybe you want to find a faster way to do it? Well, this is the video. We have all of these video editing softwares and we don't really know which one's the best or which one to use or how to use really any of them. So in this video, I'm going to show you a generic way that you can edit using any video editing program, whether it be Final Cut, DaVinci, Premiere, Vegas, even Windows Movie Maker. Moral of the story is I'm gonna show you the basics of video editing so you can get started on any program today. So let's just get into it. Hi everyone, my name is James and this is The Engineering Filmmaker, where we talk about photo, video, travel, and tech. If you like any of these topics, feel free to hit that subscribe button below, and I also have a forum on the website in the description. I also wanted to mention I'm doing a giveaway for a wireless lav kit. I will put the link right over here for the video as well as in the description. All right, so let's just get into the topics of your video editing career or how to get started in video editing. Now, this is going to be a very generic process. I'm gonna show you how to do things in both DaVinci Resolve, which is a free video editing software, and I'm also going to show you in Premiere Pro, which is a program that I personally use. I'm also gonna talk about Final Cut Pro because these are the three most used programs in my opinion. But if there is another editor out there, the steps are pretty much the same. You might just have to look into it a little bit further. Step number one is to open your program and start a new project. So let's start first with Premiere, then DaVinci. I don't have Final Cut, but I will tell you how to do it in Final Cut. So with Premiere, you'll get something that comes up that asks you up top left here if you want to start a new project or open an existing project, and you'll have a list of project names here that you've already worked on, which you probably won't have any if you're new to this. First thing you're going to want to do is start a new project. A window will come up asking you what you want the name to be, as well as where you want to save this project. So I'm gonna do that, and then I'll come back. In the meantime, if you want to see a really awesome way as to how to organize your project files and your folders, I will put a little thing here that you can click on to see that. All right, now you'll have your project open in Premiere. Now you'll see maybe a little bit different setup than I have here, but you will generally have something up top left here that says project. If you do not, you go to Window and click on Project. And you'll also see something that says Import Media to start. There's a few ways you can do that in all three of the programs, and the main way you do it in all three programs is to just go to File and then Import. Some of them may say Import Media or Import something, or this one just says Import. So you're gonna import the media. The way that I like to import my media is to simply by dragging and dropping it into the section. Now in Premiere, the next thing you're gonna wanna do is start a new sequence. A sequence is basically your timeline. It's where you're going to be editing. It lets you set your settings for your video, such as your frame rate and the resolution, if you wanna do it in 4K or 1080. There's a few ways you can do that. If you don't really know much about this area, the easiest way to do it is to just simply drag and drop your footage into the area where your footage should go. In Premiere, it says drop media here to create sequence, and then it'll make a sequence based on what your footage was shot at. This was shot at 1080p at 24 frames per second. The other option is to go to File, New Sequence, and then you have options. You can pick different frame rates, different resolutions, different presets for cameras that are already on there. So I'm gonna pick one that's 1080, 24 frames per second, anamorphic. Don't worry if you don't understand a lot of these terms, that's completely fine. You'll learn that as you go. But let's just say for the sake of this that my timeline is not gonna have the same settings as my footage, and I'll just name it test. So I'll drag my footage onto here, and as you see, I get a box that pops up that says this does not match the sequence. Do you wanna change the settings on your sequence, or do you wanna leave it? If you hit change sequence settings, it will automatically change the sequence to the correct settings to match your clips. This isn't something you always wanna do, but you can do that. And now as you see, it fits perfectly. It's the right size, it's the right frame rate. This setup is very similar in Final Cut Pro X. So real quick, let's take a look at DaVinci and we'll see how it's done in there. When you open up DaVinci, you'll get an option just like Premiere where you create a new project. So you're gonna do that, click New Project, you'll name it, and then you'll hit Create. And then the same thing goes for DaVinci. You have an area where you can drop your footage, and then you get a similar message to what you got with Premiere where it says it's not the same as your timeline. Do you want to change the settings of your timeline? And I'm just going to click change. And now you have your clips. So as you can see right off the bat, it's almost the exact same process in Premiere as DaVinci and Final Cut Pro. So the next step is kind of a recommended step. It's not something you have to do, but I would highly recommend doing it. And that is going through your program, see what's there, look at your tools, go through some settings, kind of get a feel for what you have. As you see in Premiere, you have a bunch of options up here. These will all give you different layouts, and I spend most of my time in assembly and editing, but it just depends on what you're trying to do. As of right now, since we're just starting, don't really worry about all the ins and outs, like what all this does and what everything else does. Just kind of get a feel for what's in the program and maybe basic things that you might be able to understand what they do. So let's get into the actual editing process. We have a timeline. We created a new sequence, or maybe you dragged your clip onto the new timeline and made one. So all you have to do to start your new video is I'm gonna take all my clips, just click them individually and drag them, or you can control click all of them. I'm gonna put them on my timeline and then they're all here. So now you have your clips on your timeline. There's a few things you can do. One, if you're making a vlog, this is something I do. I put all of my clips on my timeline in the order they were shot, because then I can just scrub through my entire timeline, cut my footage, and then I'm good. But if you're creating something specific, like maybe a car commercial or something, and you have a bunch of clips that were shot at different times, that is when you would go up here. You can double click a clip and you can go through and you can see in your clip what you have and what you might want. And this is a good way to kind of see the clip before you put it in your timeline. This is handy when, like I said, you have footage that's out of order that you might need to kind of put in different spots throughout your timeline. And then here's one quick tip for you. It's a little more advanced if you're a beginner, but there's little buttons here. These will make a start and stop point for the clip. So if I wanted this clip to start here and I wanted it to end there, you use the in and out points. Then you can click and drag the footage onto your timeline. We'll get more into that in a more advanced video in the future, but that's just a quick tip. And then in DaVinci Resolve, we already kind of went over this as well. You just drag your clip onto the timeline and then you have your clip on a timeline. Now here comes the bread and butter, I'll call it. It's the most necessary thing you'll need to know when you're editing, because it's basically the term of editing. This is how you edit. So we're gonna start in Premiere, and we'll start from the beginning here. And this is where you wanna be familiar with your tools. When you're just starting, I really think you only need to know two tools. It's Razor tool and your selecting tool, or I think in Final Cut, it's called the blade tool. In DaVinci, it's called a split tool. They all do the exact same thing. They make a cut in your clip so that you can cut where you want your clip to end or start. Now, there are a lot of shortcuts for this that make editing go a lot faster, but that's a future video. So in Premiere, as you can see here, there is a little razor blade icon, and when you hover over it, it says Razor tool. Now, when you go to DaVinci, you have a button up here that says Split Clips. That does the same thing. And then in Final Cut Pro X, there's a button called the Blade tool, or there's a Trim tool, which do similar things, but the Blade tool is exactly the same as the Razor blade in Premiere. Now, what you're gonna wanna do is select the Blade tool, and then now you'll see a little blade with a line going through your clip. Now, I'm gonna go through here. I'm gonna find a spot where I wanna start my clip, let's say there. And then I'm gonna go through and I'm gonna find a spot where I wanna end it, let's say there. And then I'm gonna go back and select my selection tool. I'm gonna click my clip that I don't want, hit delete. You can hit the backspace button or delete, it will delete that. And then you'll notice a little space here and you're like, why is that there? How can I get rid of it? You can do one of few things. You can highlight this clip here by clicking it and then drag it over, or you can select the area in between and also hit delete and it'll bring it back. Now I'll go through my footage again and see where I want to start. Select my blade tool, cut, selection tool, and then I'll delete this piece in between. Boom. Now you have a bunch of clips that are cut where you wanted them, you have the clips you needed, and you have them set exactly where you want them, and now you're editing a video. This is the most simplistic way to edit. There are a lot of shortcuts to make this go a lot faster, and there are a lot more advanced techniques to make this a lot easier, but if you're just starting, this is a really good way to get started and knowing how to use your program. Now, if we go to DaVinci Resolve, you can do a similar thing by finding a point where you want to cut your clip, hit the split button, and that will split your clip. And then you can go ahead and find another spot. You can select that to split, and you can do the same thing where you can select it, hit delete, and then it's gone. However, in DaVinci, it automatically brings your clips together, which is kind of a nice thing depending on what you're trying to do. So you kind of have one less step you have to do. Final Cut Pro, same thing. Use the blade tool, you cut, you delete, boom. Now this next topic is a little more advanced. It's not something you need to know right now, but there are basic effects that I would like you guys to know that you can use in your videos that you'll most likely want to use on a daily. So up here in Premiere, there's a little tab that says Effects. If you don't see it, you can always go to Window and then Effects and it'll show up. Now in Premiere, there are a ton of topics you can pick from for effects, but in our case, we're just gonna look at video transitions. And then first we're gonna go to Dissolve, which has a cross dissolve. Now a cross dissolve does something where it kind of combines the two clips, overlaps them, and transitions into the next one. And this is what it looks like. I know these clips aren't ideal. They were shot on a GoPro for behind the scenes at a wedding. If you wanna see some of that, you know, I'll put it here for you. And then there's really only two more video transitions I wanna show you as of now, just because they're super basic. One of them's called dip to black. One of them's called dip to white. This is what the dip to black looks like. This is what dip to white looks like. You can shorten these or lengthen them to make them longer or shorter, slower or faster. It's up to you. There's a lot of customization you can do, but that's more of an advanced thing. And then it's basically the same thing in DaVinci Resolve. There's a button up here you can click for effects, and then you can use a search button, and then you can find your different effects. They may be called different things in different programs, but they all do the same thing, and they all have a pretty generic name. Final Cut X, very similar thing. You find the effects window and you go look for those specific effects. Now there's one more effect I want to talk about, which is an audio transition. So let's go to audio transition, crossfade, and then in Premiere it's called constant power. It might be called something else in other programs, such as a fade. Basically all this does is it softly transitions the audio from one clip to the next. It's kind of like a cross dissolve for audio. You can also use it at the very end of a clip. What it'll do is it'll bring the audio slowly down to 0. So it's a very smooth transition for the audio to stop instead of it abruptly stopping at the end of your video. And then the same thing on DaVinci Resolve. You can do the same things with audio effects and Final Cut Pro. So the next thing is going to be very quick. It's just putting music in your video and making it so you can hear your voice over the music. Basically, all you're gonna do is import a song, same way you would import video. You're going to take your music clip and drag it right below the clips that you have for your video. And as you'll notice, the video is very loud. You can't really hear the audio in the background. If you were to do a voiceover with this, you couldn't hear it at all. So in Premiere, there's a really easy way to do this. There's two ways. What I just did is I made this a little bit bigger so I could see it. You don't have to do this. I just like doing this. This line on default is your volume. All you do is click and drag it and it'll make it quieter, which is pretty awesome. Another way you can do this is by selecting your audio clip or your music, and then you're gonna wanna go to Window, Effect Controls if it's not already there. And then you'll see here there's an option to change your dB, which is your decibel, which is your volume. By default, it has this little stopwatch clicked, which is called a keyframe. As for now, we're gonna ignore this and just turn it off by clicking it. And then you can change it to whatever value you want by scrolling left and right. And that's pretty much how you do it. With audio, it's very similar here. When you import the audio, you'll have an option just like Premiere to put down the volume or lower the volume to a lower level. Okay, so let's pretend you have your video done. You cut all of your clips to where you wanted them. You have it laid out to look really nice and you want to export your video. I'm not going to get into super in-depth export settings. I'm going to show you some really easy ways to not have to know those right now. So in Premiere, you're going to go to File, Export, Media, and they're gonna be presented with a dialog box. So you have a few options here, and I would honestly just not mess with any of it. I would change the name of what you want your export video to be called, and then you can select the file where you wanna put it by clicking that. And then you can do under preset, Premiere has a bunch of presets that you can select from that make it really easy to export. Most likely you're gonna be exporting for YouTube, and they have YouTube presets here. But if not, you can just use a generic high quality 1080p preset, which works just fine. But if you wanted a YouTube preset, you go ahead and just click YouTube 1080p full. And then once you're done with that, you're gonna click the export button. It's going to take a little bit depending on what kind of computer you have. In DaVinci Resolve, there's a few options. You can export the project by hitting Control E, or file export project, or they also have a quick export option, which is a really easy way to export your videos if you don't know much. They have just pre-selected options for you and you can just hit export. They even have YouTube options in Vimeo, just like Premiere. And then as for Final Cut Pro X, also go to File, Export, and then you'll have similar settings to pick from and similar presets to pick from. Like I mentioned, these tips will work for almost any editing program. I just use these specifically because they are the top 3 that I've seen people use, and I know a little bit about each one of them. Now, if you wanted to use Windows Movie Maker or Sony Vegas or some other editing program, these tips will most likely work just fine. You just might have to do a little more research with the program to see what your functions and your tools can do. So I would love to know, what program do you guys use or plan on using for video editing? It'd be a really cool thing. Let me know down below and we can have a conversation about it. And then lastly, if you want to see a playlist of some videos, click here. And if you want to see some other random videos, click over here in this area. But don't forget to like this video and hit that subscribe button. I also have a forum, like I mentioned before, that you can go to. That's kind of it for today, guys, and I'll see you on the next one.